Greetings and salutations, everyone. Thanks for coming. Today I have a very terrifying encounter to share with you. I also am going to do something that I very, very rarely do. But, onto the encounter part. Now, any encounter with one of these creatures is terrifying enough. But being on a secluded island, well, that makes it a lot more terrifying, doesn't it? Before we get into today's upload, a couple links. As you know, I rely on my Patreon, my PayPal, and my merch to help the channel to continue to grow and go. Those links are in the description below. Also, Dogman, Frightening Encounters, Volume 1, 2, and 3, the audiobook version. Written by Tom Lyons, narrated and produced by me, Jeffrey Nadolny, is available on Audible, Amazon, and iTunes. The links to those audiobooks are in the description as well. Now, I've taken enough of your time. Let's get on with today's upload. Shall we? Today's first part of the upload. First, let me start by saying I've always had a belief in God, and that belief was strongest when I was a child. I'm not a phony, baloney, raise your hands, hallelujah type of person, but I'm a person who tries to follow their heart and practice their faith. I'm still very human and have a little bit of the Old Testament in me. When I was 23 years old, I went out to California to visit my brother. It was a hard time in my life. I was questioning whether there was a loving God or even if he existed. Within about 3 weeks into my visit, in October of '87, my brother, his wife, his baby girl, and I went camping on Catalina Island. Originally, I thought it was Avalon Campground, but now, after looking up some info, I believe it was Hermit Gulch Campground. Anyway, I knew there were two things to watch out for during the stay, rattlesnakes and wild hog. After the ferry ride, we hiked out to our campground and arrived there late in the afternoon. There were 3 groups of campers that night. Most of the sites were empty. On our site, we each had our own tent. I had mine, my brother had his with his family. We were located near the bathhouse at the edge of the woods, a short hike to the botanical gardens. When night came, I decided to take a walk into town, pick up a 6-pack of beer, and bring it to share with my brother. I really didn't need the beer. It was just an excuse to get out for a walk. It was a little treat for my brother and myself. The night was beautiful. I was surprised how the air had cooled down from the daytime temp. The stars were shining brightly, and it was as if you could reach out and touch them. You could faintly see the mountains against the now darkened sky. I began to walk past the bathhouse and onto the dirt road. As I walked onto the dirt road, I noticed the road was getting harder and harder to see. I was moving away from the utility light of the bathhouse. I turned my head sideways so that my eyes could see a little light that was reflecting off the road. I continued to walk when all of a sudden I started to hear this repetitive, almost inaudible moan breathing sound. Ah, ah. I thought my mind was playing tricks on me. So I said a little prayer in my head. Then the sound grew louder, and I thought, man, this is real. I said another prayer to the Lord, but this time out loud in an attempt to scare whatever it was away. The noise stopped. I didn't want anything to do with the noise. I continued walking and eventually started to come out of the darkness back into the light of another utility light. There were now horses on my right, greeting me with their snorts. I thought maybe this was what I heard, reverberating off the ground while I was walking toward the horse. I thought, Pete, you're losing it. I continued to walk, and now the golf course was on my left. As I looked around, I remember thinking, there's not a soul around. This place just really shuts down at night. I walked along and past the parked golf carts and continued until I was across from the outbuilding, when all of a sudden the horses that I had passed moments earlier freaked. And I mean freaked. I thought either a fight had broken out or they were aware of my presence. Funny thing was that most of them were running straight toward me. I got off the road and approached the barbed wire fence. Some of them came to a stop not far from me. I could see one of the ears pinned back, nostrils flaring, eyes wide with the white showing, and the head high, bouncing in an agitated motion. I started to talk out loud to them, trying to calm them with my voice, all the while looking down the area I had just came on that dirt road. There was nothing. I came away from the barbed wire fence and got back on the dirt road. I took 15 to 20 steps on that dirt road heading to town and decided I was going to look one more time down that dirt road. This time I spun around to my left quickly and looked down the road at the same area, trying to catch whatever it was off guard. And to my amazement, way down the road near the golf course side, away from the horses, I saw a human silhouette, roughly 6 feet tall. It was in mid-stride with its head slightly lowered. As I looked towards it, it stopped his stride and stood erect. He stood still for a brief moment and then leaned to his left, as if realizing that I could see him. He had come into the light, and I could clearly see a shadowed outline of what I thought was a person, head, arms, legs. He next took off like a professional baseball player stealing second, but instead sliding feet first behind a small group of bushes. He came into them at full speed in a crouched position, stopping dead behind the bushes. My first thought was, this guy's pretty fast and he's trying to scare me. What an immature nut. What if I take my 6'1", 220 bodybuilding self over there and put a little scare into him? However, just before I could do this, I saw his head pop up and recede twice behind the bushes. This time, I got a good look at its head, and the shape did not look human. Immediately, a fear grew within me, and I couldn't stop because I realized what this was. And I had just come from a completely dark area where this thing was right next to me. I was in disbelief. How could it be way out here on an island? But I certainly knew what it was from past experiences. I thought that I was in lethal danger. I thought it was stalking me, measuring me up for a quick strike. I thought I was going to witness my own death. My breathing went up as well as my thought process. I thought quickly, I can't outrun it. I could go out to an outbuilding, break in, but then what? Or I could join the horses because they didn't like its presence. I started to pray out loud, and believe me, my voice was full of emotion. Panic would be an understatement. I was asking Jesus for help. I kept pleading and pleading, and was just ready to give up and run through the barbed wire fence, if I had to join the horses, when my prayers were answered. Let's just say I was no longer afraid. The next thing I observed was the Bigfoot running parallel to me on a golf course. I was trying to look at it out of the corner of my eye, but then I just had to look right at it. This is what I observed while it was running by. The color of its body was either brown or reddish brown overall. Its strides were smooth and efficient. Its palms were open and face down in a slight curled position with its thumbs folded beneath. I think the thumbs were folded. I don't know, the hands were not closed into a fist. As the arms pumped rhythmically with each stride, the open hand snapped back and forth into a curled position. The upper body was erect and leaning forward slightly. There was no heavy breathing. When it ran, I estimate its speed was 20 to 25 miles an hour. After it disappeared into the darkness, I praised God and was thankful that I was still alive. I really wasn't concerned or scared the rest of the walk. Upon returning to camp that night, I told my brother what happened. He had that 1,000-mile stare. I decided to focus on how beautiful the night was and how majestic the mountains were earlier that night. Anyway, who cares? I know what happened. My brother's wife was busy trying to calm down the baby in the tent. We shared a couple of beers, and around 11:30 retired to our respective tents. I was tired. I had a good workout the day before and a long walk to town with much to be happy about. When I got in my sleeping bag that night, I was really feeling good. The beer had also relaxed me, and I drifted off to sleep rather quickly. The next thing I heard was this voice calling my name over and over again. "Pete! Peter! Is that you?" I finally answered my brother, saying, "It's not me." I could eventually also hear these snorting sounds like a pig just outside of my tent. I yelled back to my brother that it was a pig and go back to sleep. Now understand this. I've never in all my encounters heard this creature vocalize, so bear with my thought process. Besides, God had taken care of the Bigfoot earlier. The next thing we heard were sounds from that of a childlike voice. Animal calls is the only way I could describe them. I thought maybe the drunk campers my brother and I had spoken to earlier. I was starting to get angry and scared. My brother and I started yelling, "Who's out there? Knock it off!" Shamefully, there may have been a few obscenities thrown in there. We were both yelling at it to stop, and then the sound changed. This time, the sound I heard was like a cat in a fight, but only much louder. I was thinking, human? No, that's definitely an animal. I kept going back and forth with this thought. It drowned out 2 screaming adult males. All 3 sounds it made never overlapped and didn't sound like they were coming from ground level. My sister-in-law was hysterical. My brother and his wife were yelling for me to come out of the tent because I had a knife. I was almost paralyzed with fear, and yes, I was praying. I yelled back to my sister-in-law to ignore it. I don't know if what I did next was the most rational thing to do, but I was tired of them and it yelling at me. And what if it was one of the campers pulling a prank? As soon as I unzipped the tent, the noise stopped. When I came out shaking with the knife in hand, don't worry, the knife was just for show at the time. I really don't think I would have used it, even if I had to. I could hear something shuffling the leaves in the woods. My brother then came out of his tent. It stopped momentarily. Marty proceeded to tell me that it was a hog and a cat fighting over the snacks we left out. I asked him what if it was the Bigfoot. He persisted with his theory, and then he went back to his tent to console his wife. As soon as my brother left, the leaves captured that movement of whatever it was, but this time you could distinctly hear it moving on 2 legs. I heard 4 steps progressively getting fainter as it moved away from us through the woods. Crunch, 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 crunch. No human can move like that through complete darkness without special equipment. I knew without a doubt that our friend had returned. I remember thinking, who cares? No one's ever going to believe me. We all slept in the same tent that night. I was on the side of the tent by the woods and didn't get a wink of sleep. My mind was racing the whole night on all of the events that had happened. The next day, I looked for tracks but found none around the picnic table. There were snacks on the table, beer, and possibly a soiled diaper. But 2 of the bottles that still had beer in them were gone. This may sound ridiculous, but this is the truth. I wanted to stay the next day, but my sister-in-law didn't want anything to do with it. Oh, by the way, neither I nor my brother were drunk during this encounter. Honest to God, this is a true story, I swear. Here's a description of Catalina Island. Catalina Island is one of the Channel Islands, about 20 miles off the coast of LA. The island is about 76 square miles, of which most 88% is uninhabited by people. 42,000 acres of land set aside for the unique ecosystem. A diverse habitat is home to thousands of species of native plants and animals. It also supports feral animal, including cat, hog, goat, and buffalo, although the goat are being eliminated. 2 of these unique animals can't be found anywhere in the world, and they are the beachy ground squirrel and the Catalina fox. Now, this is my own kind of view on what happened that night. I honestly don't think that what he saw was a Sasquatch. I really honestly think that what he saw that night was either a Dogman or, according to Kuhnbo's types, is a type 3, which resembles a dog lacking a tail. Very muscular. He didn't see the face. The noises it was making were really not in line with what a Squatch makes. More or less with what a Dogman would make. Also, the population of goat is getting completely wiped out on the island. Now, a Squatch will, depending on how hungry it is, it'll hunt. We all know it'll hunt. It'll hunt deer, but I really don't think that it's going to completely eliminate a whole species. I really honestly think that Squatches are a lot smarter. I've heard that they actually can herd animals like cowboys do when herding cattle. So I think they would be a lot more careful with their food resources, more so than a Dogman. But, this is just, it's based on theory and speculation. I'm not saying I know anything. So it's just my theory. And if you want to go with that one, go with that one. And if you don't, go with the Bigfoot theory. It's either or. So moving on. Now the next part of the upload is something I really don't do a lot of, which is discussing legend and stuff like that. Yes, periodically I do it, but I don't know, and especially stuff that people may have heard about, but I kind of want to share this with some people or you guys because some of you may not have heard about this. So here goes. We've all heard of the story of the United Kingdom's Black Shuck, the demon hound, but there is another hairy creature in that country. This story was uncovered by Roger Parsons and dates from 1926. A young archaeologist living in Llangrick Fen, near the appropriately named Dog Dyke, one day discovered a set of possibly Neolithic remains in a peat bog. The curious thing was that the skeleton uncovered appeared to have large canine-like snout, the wolf's head, in fact. The young scientist carried the skull to his cottage and set about a minute examination of the bone structure. After several hours of work, he admitted defeat. The wolf's head would not submit to any rational scientific explanation, and so he decided it was a hoax, possibly in the same vein as the famous Pit-Down Man. In that case, the lower jaw of an orangutan had been used to fake the preserved skeleton of the early species of man. In this case, the Langrick fen, archaeologists believed that the monstrosity he uncovered to be a hoax, got up by a traveling fairground to excite the crowds. Having served its purpose, the thing had been dumped in the fen when the fairground passed by. That night, our scientist friend found it impossible to sleep. A scratching noise, as of a large animal pawing at the ground, came from the back of his house. He got out of bed and was on the point of investigating further when he heard a sharp rat-tat on the window. He snapped his head in the direction of the sound and, to his amazement, saw a dark shadow watching him. This image began to define itself into a form of a human being with the head of a large wolf. Transfixed with terror, the man could do nothing but stare as this thing's thick black lips drew back into a snarl, and its hot, fetid breath steamed the window pane. The creature howled in fury and pulled back its muscular arm ready to break the glass. In that instant, the scientist recovered his wits and ran for the door. As he fled to the kitchen, he heard the shattering of glass behind him and the paddling of paws upon the bare boards of his bedroom floor. The scientist locked himself into the pantry and curled up, tight, quivering in a ball. All through that night he heard the clicking of long, uncut claws and the shuffling of twisting nostrils. At last, the first hint of dawn crept under the pantry door, and the scientist eased back the bolt and stepped outside. There was no sign of the uncanny visitor of that night before, and the man began to believe that he had suffered some sort of brain fever. On entering his bedroom, however, he found evidence of the supernatural visitation. The table whereon he had placed the skull was overturned, and the window of the room was shivered into fragments. He wasted no time in snatching up the skull and hastened to the burial site. He threw the strange head back into the hole and covered it over with several layers of peat. And from that day, the werewolf of Dogdyke had been laid to rest. Well, there you have it, guys. I hope you guys enjoyed today's upload. And thank you for always listening. It means the world to me. I hope everyone is warm and safe this evening. It seems like we are just getting slammed with the winter storms from Texas all the way up to Maine and out into the western part of the country. So I hope everyone's warm, safe, and just happy. Anyway, have a great night, guys, and thanks again.